Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome back to Elite Dangerous. As you may have heard by now, I managed to catch up with the Distant Worlds expedition. This video covers my journey through waypoint 17 and waypoint 18, where the expedition embarked upon an epic mountain climb that only a few commanders actually managed to survive. I actually arrived at waypoint 17 a little bit ahead of the expedition, so I took the opportunity to fly up above the galactic core. Here in this region of space, the starfield is still quite dense and provides for some absolutely stunning backdrops. Not far away, I found a pair of binary planets orbiting each other extremely closer, one of them significantly larger than the other. I took the opportunity to land on the smaller of the two so that I could look up from the surface of the planet and be treated to this absolutely spectacular view. Much of the planet had a fairly flat surface, but there were areas that were very mountainous, and those are the areas I chose to fly over and then drive through. In the distance you can see the galactic core and get an idea of just how high above the plane I actually am. This was an exceptionally interesting system. In the background there you get a brief glimpse of a ringed brown dwarf. Ultimately I spent quite a lot of time just driving around the surface of this planet, gathering resources, much like I did on one of the other planets in the previous episode. But finally it was time to get back into my ship and start flying away again to find another destination. I could still travel up further yet above the plane of the galactic core, and that was exactly what I had in mind. This was actually the highest point I was able to travel, and I found myself in a system with 3 stars. So before heading all the way back down to waypoint 17 and meeting up with the expedition, I thought an exploration of this system was in order. There was a landable planet fairly close by to the central stars there. It was a little bit further away than I would have liked, but when I got down to the surface, I was later to be treated to a sight I wasn't expecting to see. The visuals of these type of locations can be rather strange. As you approach the planets, they tend to change colour as they've been illuminated by the galactic core itself. Of course, I'm using a graphic injector here, I'm using EDFX, and later on I will switch that off and show you what it looks like without the enhanced graphics. And you'll see for yourself that quite often the default graphics for Elite Dangerous can look spectacularly good, and in many cases better than any of the mods actually make it. Over to the right there, you can see a slight tint of orange just peeking above the horizon. My initial thought was that that might have been a nebula, but then I realised it was the start of sunrise. So I got back in my ship and decided that it might be nice to chase the sunrise for a bit. I have been up here previously above the galactic core, but that was with my other commander, Commander Granite, and it was before the release of Horizon, so this is the first sunrise I've seen above the galactic core from a planetary surface. And I've got to admit, it's actually rather beautiful. I soon flew upwards a bit to get a slightly better view of the sunrise, at which point the 3rd star in this system came into view. And I thought now was as good a time as any to see what this looked like with the default Elite Dangerous graphics. Now I do run a mod that sometimes tends to run a bit bright, so seeing how gorgeous the default graphics were up here really was a lovely treat. I spent a lot of time on this planet, and much of it was in virtual reality, where I sat in my SRV and watched the sunrise. When I logged back in the game later on in the day, I found that the 2 stars here were in a solar eclipse, so I took this opportunity to take a bit of time-lapse footage. But eventually it was time to head on back to waypoint 17 and be there for the meetup. Now you can see here that this planet had some very interesting features indeed. Some locations within Elite Dangerous just border on being completely photorealistic. You can see that a group of players were already here and organised themselves in a little ship circle. Unfortunately on this occasion I didn't stay around for too long, but I did stay around for long enough to film a good bit of footage and have a little bit of a drive around and say hello to the commanders here. As always, I was really impressed with the size of the anacondas. Driving underneath them in an SRV really does hit home just how big they actually are. So after a brief stint here, I returned to the game later on to make my way towards waypoint 18. And en route to the next waypoint, I found quite a few interesting sights, in particular this rather unusual looking gas giant, made all the better by the large rings it's got, as well as the dense starfield behind it. Further on, I found another system that had 3 stars with it in it, but this one was a bit different to the previous one. All 3 of them were completely different colours to each other, and this was actually the first time I'd seen a white dwarf orbiting so close to a larger sun. I had to be a little bit careful filming this footage. It might not seem it, but I'm actually very, very close to the White Dwarf at that point. But I did fly around here for quite a long time, just taking in the sight. And I've got to wonder, if we ever had the possibility of multiple light sources, what kind of lighting effect that would have on an atmospheric planet when down on the surface. As I arrived in the system for waypoint 18, I bumped into Commander Isaac Asimov, and we stopped to exchange a few words before I finally moved onto the planet and landed at the meeting camp. Now, as far as I understand it, many of these locations are chosen by Commander Aramis, who is one of the co-organisers of the Distant Worlds expedition, and the first, of course, to travel across the galaxy. And nearly always there's a feature that really does impact when you first land here. In this case, it was an extremely large mountain that was right nearby, and ultimately that mountain was to be a central feature of what turned out to be a somewhat spontaneous event that occurred here. It was also nice to see a Cobra there. I really do admire a player that can spend their time to get one of those out here. Above the nearby mountain range was the lovely red star there, struck through with the backdrop of the galactic core. Over time, a lot of commanders slowly started to meet up here, and it was getting time to move on to our mountain climb. And as we gathered, the fleet flagship arrived, the Zombie Wasp 4, a Type 9, and actually one of my favourite ships in the game, piloted by Commander Olivia Vespera, who was one of 15 commanders gathered here to attempt the climb of this mountain. Now, I've got to admit that I think that no one truly expected just what a challenge the climb of this mountain would be. The mountain from base to peak is 15 kilometres. To put that in context, Mount Everest is just shy of 9 kilometres. But of course, the distance we would have to travel would be far greater than that, as that measurement didn't account for the angular slope of the mountain and all its peaks and rises as well. I don't know what the total distance was that the commanders here travelled, but it was a significant multiple of that 15 kilometres. Now, it may not look it, but already here we are quite a way up the mountain, and unfortunately I had some computer issues here. My game client crashed, and when I logged back in I couldn't get into the same instance again. I returned to my ship, found myself inside the mountain, and although I should have logged back out again, I decided to fly through the mountain and took a lot of damage to my ship here. You can see there I'm down at 10% hull at this point, but fortunately since then Frontier Support have actually fixed it for me. But getting back in my ship did provide for the chance to take some aerial footage where I'm able to offer a true sense of scale of this journey. Yes, that's one humongous mountain, but so far the event had been fairly easy going, although unfortunately we had lost a few SRVs, but that was nothing compared to what was to come. The next leg of the journey proved to be an exceptional challenge. Here, the incline of the mountain got in excess of 55 degrees. There are no flat areas on this mountain slope, which is why a number of other commanders here and myself were unable to land our ships and rejoin the climb. The bumps and drops and holes here all gave significant damage to a lot of SRVs here, and many commanders ended up losing their vehicles. It got to the point where the sound of an SRV exploding was all too frequent, along with news on the comms channel of who had been lost this time. But despite the challenges, many of the commanders here continued the climb in the hopes of reaching the summit. Here you can see Commander Bloody Nutter, who himself had already lost some SRVs, so returned to his ship to provide some assistance and some illumination to the remaining commanders in their vehicles. We later flew to the top of the mountain in an attempt to find the peak so that we could act as a guiding beacon to those who could finally make the ascent. Over the comms channel, commanders continued to discuss their progress, and it turned out that Dr. Kai was right at the very front of the climb. Here you can see Dr. Kai about to reach the first of many false peaks. That effort to reach a peak, only to realise when you get there that there's still a lot of distance left to go. But here I was, waiting at the top of the mountain itself, when Dr. Kai appeared over the edge. He had made it. 15 commanders had set out on this epic climb, and only 4 were to make it, Dr. Kai being the first. After a 2-hour climb to the summit, I think his victory celebration here was well earned. Whilst 11 commanders were lost by the wayside, 4 did ultimately make it, along with a number of other commanders from the various instances. And all this just goes to show that the Distant Worlds expedition is about far more than just space travel. and hyperspace jumps. The Distant Worlds has become much larger than it was ever expected to be. An amazing turnout of commanders, of players, an amazing interest from the community, both within Elite Dangerous and from the games media at large. It's an event that has inspired hundreds, if not thousands of people. And it's something that keeps the interest of many players as they travel together across the Elite Dangerous galaxy. Distant Worlds does have a very extensive and very detailed newsletter that is released weekly, and I've linked the whole forum thread in the video description below, where you can see all the newsletters so far released. They're very much worth reading, and they will let you know exactly what does go on within Distant Worlds, and I'm going to talk about the highlights of all that in an upcoming video. Now, all of this doesn't go without a huge amount of work. It takes a lot of organising, and it takes a lot of time for people to keep this going. Aramis and Dr. Kai in particular have spent uncounted hours just to make Distant Worlds the success it is. Now, I really hope you don't mind me mentioning this, and I'm sure you all totally appreciate the work that goes into this. And with that in mind, I'd just like to mention that the newsletter does have a donation button on it, and I'll also include that donation button in the video description below. Now, none of this money would go to me, it's purely to help the organisers of the Distant Worlds expedition. And I'm sure any amount would be greatly received. It's just a small token of appreciation and a way of saying thank you for the many hours of fun that this event has given players. I'm currently en route to waypoint 19, which is just over 5,000 light years away from the point at the end of this video. There's still a few more waypoints left, yet until we reach Beagle Point, which marks the outer edge of the galaxy. At that point, I don't know what is going to happen. That will be the final meeting place of the expedition, but perhaps something else will be decided at that point. After all, if many hundreds of commanders actually reach that area, it'd be a shame to all just disperse and go our separate ways. But one thing's for sure, this expedition has been an amazing experience, and probably one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had. I've really enjoyed mixing with all the players out there that are involved with this, and I'm looking forward to mixing with a whole load more of you and talking with you as we go along on this epic journey. So there will be more videos for me on Distant Worlds coming soon. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome back to Elite Dangerous.